the right place. Inflation's come down. The growth is still pretty good if you look at what's going around the world. But I guess we're still tempered by lots of stuff in the geopolitical side. Tariffs coming at us. Israel has attacked Iran. Who knows what's going to happen about that? So I think there's just way too much fun in our world and so much uncertainty. But at the same time, there's a lot of interesting things going well. Agriculture did well because of good weather. The tech side is going up. Manufacturing is still struggling, but on the whole, a good side. Inflation down, dollar rate quite stable. So a lot of good things showing up, and the interest came down from the monetary policy from 10 to 9.75 just earlier this week. So lots of interesting things going on. But I guess there's still always concern about the balance between more taxation and economic stimulus. And I think that's a thing the CS and his team have to keep balancing, because we do need more productivity in the economy for us to lift it up. So while we say we're walking a tightrope with this budget and the current economic situation, I'm still quite positive that there's a lot of the engagement we've had is being listened to. We can see some of it coming out in the policies that have come through. And I think in the end, as a resilient bunch of people called Kenyans,
we live in interesting times. And when we live in these interesting times, we realize because we are impacted by anything that happens from a geopolitical perspective, we are not immune. And if we look at the global outlook, because before we come and see what's happening in Kenya, in East Africa and then Kenya, it's good for us to understand what's happening globally. If we look at the global economic growth, of course, it's being tempered by what's happening in the US with the tariffs, the tariff war. We don't know where that will end up. And that means that global growth has actually been revised downwards to around 1.9% in 2025. And this is just because of not understanding what's happening, in the global footprint and what, and how everybody will react to what's happening in the US. When we look at inflation, it has been well contained globally, apart from the US, with the tariff wars and the impact of this on the US economy. The Fed is unable then to lower interest rates, and so there's going to be a challenge there. So coming then to sub-Saharan Africa, better GDP growth than obviously what's happening globally. We'll get to the 3.8 and then up to 4.1 in 2026, which is good. The challenge remains the debt burden of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and I've seen even from the poll, people are worried about public debt, and that then operates then across even sub-Saharan Africa, because most of the debt then is in foreign currency, which means then there's pressure on local currencies going forward. But I think from a sub-Saharan Africa perspective, when we look at the young population, that's, we always talk about it as a dividend that we need to tap into. But the only challenge is with the rates of unemployment, and how do we tackle that? Because if we don't do that, then it becomes a ticking time bomb. Closer home to East Africa, again, the performance from a GDP perspective has been good. When we look at where Kenya is heading, when we look at Uganda, and even then from inflation, we've been able to contain, apart from our neighbors in Ethiopia. But I mean, we have to commend them from, the high 30s, looking at then inflation at about 19 to 20. So inflation has been well contained when we look at the East African economy. Again, debt comes closer home from an East African perspective, because we are using debt to finance infrastructure, but then the repayments then pose several challenges, because how then do you deal with, the repayments when something happens to your currency. If it weakens, it means then your debt burden becomes higher, not because you've borrowed more, but because your currency has weakened.
In terms of budget, we keep seeing that being on an upward trend. So this year's budget will be 4.2 trillion shillings, up from about 4 trillion shillings last year. So it's a growth, although it's a modest one, and of course we understand that's informed by the need to achieve fiscal consolidation. Obviously, Gladys mentioned the issue of debt is a big concern, so we can see some effort to contain, the growth in the budget, which I think is a good thing. And but the trend is generally upwards in terms of budget growth. In previous years, it's been as high as 10%, upwards of 11 and 12%. So this year there's some effort to contain that growth, which I think is commendable. And hopefully, if there isn't other shocks, although we've just been informed that there is a lot that's happening, so that can definitely impact the budget. Now, in terms of the ordinary revenue, which is where most of the tax revenue sits, so ordinary revenue is typically tax revenue plus investment and other non-tax revenue. We are seeing the budget projecting about 2.7 trillion in ordinary revenue from 2.5. So last year was an interesting one. When the budget started, it was at a much higher level, but then there were two supplementary revisions which brought down the target or the projection to 2.5 trillion. So this year that goes up to 2.7 trillion. Again, it's not as big an increment as what was projected last year. Actually, last year, additional tax revenue that was supposed to come through the finance bill was projected at over 300 billion shillings. But this year, it's just about 30 billion from the new tax measures. Obviously, there are other administrative measures that are supposed to contribute towards the growth in the tax revenue. But again, some effort to contain that. CS did allude to that in his speech, that is informed by the appetite of Kenyans in terms of new tax measures. I don't know whether those are the same Kenyans sitting in this room. Bwana CS, you may want to ask them if they are willing to pay more, or if there are those Kenyans who don't want to pay more. But there's some good effort there to contain the growth in revenue as well, and to avoid, tax increases that are deemed to be burdening the population. So that's a good effort on the part of the government.
So the world economy is actually projected to slow in 2025, maybe rebound in 2026 slightly, but the effects of some of the decisions that are being taken today may be far-reaching and may take a while. And so we have to adjust to the changing circumstances as domestic economy. Our domestic economy, I agree with Gladys that we have shown resilience, and this is largely attributed to the diversified economy that we have. And I think I don't want to repeat what you said, that you eloquently said. Our projection for 25 is actually 5.3. I think you have mentioned 5%, but then let's monitor how it goes. It may be 5, it may be 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, depending on if we don't face any serious or unforeseen external and internal shocks. I think our economy had just started picking up from last year. I will tell you, even in terms of revenue collection, the first half of the year was tough. We underperformed in terms of revenue collection, and the chairman is here, he would confirm the same. The increase in revenue, if you look at the numbers, was just about 4.6% over the same period the previous year. Now, compared to the second half, there was a rebound. Now, the second half, the growth was about 9.6, almost going to 10, and we hope that that will continue into 2025, 2026. Then that would help us resolve a number of issues. So our economy grew at 4.7%. That again is not news. You are already aware of that. I don't want to talk about the macros. Our macros have been working very well. Inflation is contained. We also have enough forex reserve. I think the highest in a record. I mean, in history. We also have our exchange rate, which has stabilized. Again, we almost lost our currency in terms of